A few weeks had slipped by since Lord Eddard Stark's execution on the Great September Steps, and King's Landing seethed with a tinderbox tension. The city walls bristled with newly installed guards, and rumors lapped at every street corner like waves against the banks of the Blackwater rush. Over the parapets, the intermittent flash of Lannister crimson banners was a reminder that the Iron Throne's new masters were ever watchful. Golden lion sigils flew with pride, but beneath that veneer of pride lurked a profound anxiety. The taste of fear had not fully settled on the tongues of those who reigned, yet the realm felt the first tremors of uncertainty. In the Red Keep's towering halls, whispers of a visitor had begun to circulate. He was said to be tall, lithe, and possessed of hair so fair it caught the torchlight like pale gold. Courtiers and servants gossiped about a man calling himself Vexen, a representative from the Golden Company, or so he claimed. The Golden Company's repute as sellswords loyal to gold and rumored Targaryen loyalists had always been cause for suspicion in the halls of power, though no one dared challenge him openly without direct orders. Cersei Lannister had received him, accompanied by her son, the newly anointed King Joffrey, who regarded all men with an arrogant sneer. They were intrigued, perhaps, by the notion of forging some alliance with a company that had a storied heritage of serving exiled Targaryens. Yet, Vexen's conversation that day had been crisp and unsentimental. He offered terms, asked for gold, and regaled them with just enough detail of the Golden Company's might to whet their appetites. Then, as quickly as he had come, he left the city, leaving only minor questions in his wake. Why had he appeared so suddenly? And why did he vanish so quickly? In the weeks that followed, those questions gathered dust. So much else captured the realm's attention. Lord Tywin Lannister was the true hand of the king now, orchestrating the war efforts in response to Robb Stark's moves. Robb Stark was marching south, crowned king in the north by his bannermen, and the War of the Five Kings was in full swing. Renley Baratheon had crowned himself at Highgarden, Stannis gathered strength on Dragonstone, Joffrey sat on the Iron Throne, and Balon Greyjoy, though distant, declared himself king of the Isles and the North. Each king scrambled for advantage. And so, amidst these five swirling powers, the matter of one mysterious golden-haired messenger felt like a minor footnote, until disturbing news of an entirely different sort began to spread. At first, the tidings arrived garbled, as if even the people carrying them could scarcely believe what they relayed. Strange shadows in the sky near the Westerlands. Farmholds burned down to cinders with no sign of a conventional army. Miners in the hills claimed to have seen something monstrous in the clouds that blotted out the sun. Some said it was a demon from the Seven Hells, a monster from the old tales. Others, braver or more learned, whispered that it might be a dragon. But dragons had been extinct for more than a century. Extinct, that was, unless one heeded the occasional rumors across the seas in Essos. To most in the Seven Kingdoms, tales of living dragons were the stuff of old Granny's bedtime stories. Impossible. King Joffrey, enthroned in the Red Keep, dismissed these rumors as the ravings of frightened peasants. Cersei smirked at the notion of dragons returning, deciding it was no more than an attempt by rebels to sow panic. Tyrion Lannister, newly arrived from the field, listened more thoughtfully, for he had heard that Daenerys Targaryen had somehow acquired dragons across the narrow sea. But those were hatchlings, if rumor had it correct, and could not possibly have reached the Westerlands unnoticed, nor grown so large as to strike fear into entire towns. And so the official stance was to pay no heed. The Lannisters believed their might unassailable. They had the resources of Casterly Rock, the cunning of Tywin, and the armies that obeyed their coin. Yet, as ravens flew in with one message after another describing scorched hamlets, collapsed mines, and a silhouette black as midnight against the clouds, even the Red Keep's confidence faltered. While the capital debated how best to respond to these stories, Tywin Lannister had taken the largest portion of the Lannister forces to Harrenhal, that great ruin which had, since the days of Aegon the Conqueror, stood as a testament to the futility of defying dragons. Harren the Black and his line had died as their massive fortress melted around them under the flames of Balerion the Black Dread. The ruins' melted towers and vast courtyards were so enormous that Tywin had made them his temporary seat while he directed campaigns against the Northmen. In truth, Some considered Harrenhal accursed, haunted by the ghosts of those who had perished in Dragonfire generations ago. If Tywin was one for superstition, he did not show it. To him, Harrenhal was simply a strategic position near the Riverlands. From there, he could crush Robb Stark before the so-called king in the north became too great a threat. Arya Stark was hidden among Tywin's servants in that very fortress. She had managed to keep her identity concealed after her father's death. Disguised as a cupbearer, her hair chopped short, her presence explained away by Yoren and then by chance. She lived in a swirling tempest of fear, anger, and guilt, hardly able to piece together her own place in the world. A part of her wanted to flee, to find her brother Robb's camp. Another part realized she might glean information here, learn Lannister secrets, or at least remain close to her greatest enemies to see how best to harm them. She had no illusions that she was safe. She survived day by day, hour by hour, clinging to the memory of her father's final moments. The horrifying image of Joffrey's smug face as he ordered the beheading was a brand on her heart, fueling her with determination as potent as it was dangerous. Then came the day when the air above Harrenhal changed. No clarion call of horns heralded this arrival, no proud banner. Rather, distant roars, so deep they shook the very stones, were heard in the early hours. The Lannister men looked skyward, baffled. Some said it was thunder. Others swore they saw a winged shape drifting in the clouds. The fear that had been building in rumors across the countryside now manifested in wide-eyed terror among men who had never faced anything more frightening than cavalry or siege weapons. Yet Tywin Lannister was not one to be swayed by whispers. Even as the sky churned with unnatural turbulence, he stood in the courtyard demanding facts from his subordinates. Had they truly seen something in the sky? Why had no outriders returned to confirm? A hush fell over the fortress as the thing in the sky descended with a roar that sounded like mountains colliding. It was black as a starless midnight, bigger than any living creature that had walked or flown in Westeros for centuries. Its eyes burned a furious red, reminiscent of smoldering coals in a blacksmith's forge. Those who had heard the stories of Balerion felt a creeping sense of ancestral dread, as though all the horrors of the Targaryen conquest had returned in living flesh. The name Carnage would be etched into the minds of those who survived that day, because that was what the winged beast brought with it. Harrenhal's broadest courtyard was partly open to the sky. It had enough space for thousands of men, but even then, the monstrous black shape seemed to fill it. The dragon's landing cracked the ancient flagstones, sending shockwaves through the ground. Men scattered, diving behind remnants of walls or any piece of shelter they could find. But the heat of Carnage's breath followed them, swirling in plumes of ash and smoke. Ballistae were manned with shaking hands. A few archers knocked arrows, though it was like a child's defiance in front of a rampaging giant. The Lannister red cloaks present that day realized in some primal corner of their hearts that no ordinary arrow could slay a beast so massive. Amidst this mayhem, a slender figure slid from the dragon's flank, dropping gracefully onto the shattered stones. He wore dark leathers that bore faint golden accents, the color of wealth and hidden power. When he pulled free the helmet that protected his head from the rush of dragonflight, his hair caught the daylight, shimmering almost white. It was then that the trembling men of House Lannister realized who it was. The same man who had appeared in King's Landing as a representative of the Golden Company. He had come in secrecy, wearing a polite smile. Now he came in full Valyrian glory, wearing the mightiest living weapon they had ever seen. There was no need to guess how lethal this new arrival could be. Vexen, for that was his name, surveyed the courtyard. Men cowered everywhere, and the crackle of flames echoed against the scorched towers. In one swift motion, he climbed a half-crumbled staircase to make himself visible. "I am Vexen," he announced, his voice echoing over the din of the smoldering ruin. "True heir to the blood of old Valyria. I come to reclaim what was taken from my ancestors by the treachery of houses that claim the Iron Throne." His voice was resonant but edged with something that set the heart pounding. A trace of otherworldly confidence or madness. Who could tell? Meanwhile, Carnage prowled the courtyard, its enormous claws scraping the stones. The dragon's luminous red eyes scanned every potential threat, daring the men to test their steel. Tywin Lannister appeared, guarded by a retinue of soldiers brandishing their swords with trembling grips. He stopped, assessing the damage already done, the blackened stones and the cinders of men who had been too slow to run. He did not flinch, though his mouth formed a grim line. "Who are you to burn Lannister men?" came his chilly demand. "You show up on Dragonback without a banner. Do you think this is how wars are won, by theatrics?" Vexen's gaze was as cold as Tywin's words. For a flicker of a moment, no one dared breathe. Then the newcomer's expression shifted from harsh defiance to something almost akin to amusement. "They call me the last Dragon Lord of Valyria. Whether you believe that is of no interest to me. I burned your men because they raised arms against my arrival. As for banners..." He gestured over the parapets where the Lannister banner hung like a red shadow. "You'll see mine soon enough, and it will be of black wings and fire." Tywin signaled for his men to stand down, though few lowered their weapons with any real confidence. Over the centuries, Tywin had built an aura of invincibility around the Lannister name. But here, in the place once melted by Aegon the Conqueror's dragon, the presence of another unstoppable beast cast the Lannister's strength into doubt. Tywin's keen mind was already assessing the stranger. This man, Vexen, had previously introduced himself at King's Landing as a representative of the Golden Company. But that must have been a ruse or only part of a much grander scheme. Was he Targaryen? Some offshoot? Perhaps not. Valyria's ancient lines were said to have been obliterated in the Doom, yet rumors persisted that some had survived among the free cities or deeper in the continent of Essos. A dragon so large did not sprout up overnight. This had been in the works for years, maybe decades. Still, Tywin would not be cowed so easily. Arya Stark stood among the terrified servants. Her cupbearer's garb was dusty from the crumbling mortar of the stronghold, her short-cropped hair hidden beneath a simple cap. She craned her neck to witness the monstrous shape pacing in the courtyard, black scales shimmering with each movement. The dragon was as large as a small mountain, bigger than any measure she had known from the tales. The heat from its proximity felt suffocating, like standing too close to a roaring forge. She could see the awe and disbelief on men's faces. Even though she was but a slip of a girl, her eyes were drawn by the primal majesty of the creature. She felt the same numb shock that had gripped her the day she watched her father die, her mind uncertain how to process a sight so monstrous and cataclysmic. The notion that dragons were gone from the world had been comforting, a stable cornerstone of reality. Now that cornerstone was shattered. With his men forming a circle, Tywin offered careful words. "Harrenhal is no man's fortress. You come to claim it." His voice was measured, never betraying weakness. "It's a ruin, a tomb for the foolish. My men are here for the war effort. If you seek to test your might, you'll find no shortage of challenges. But be aware, no matter how large your dragon is, the 7 kingdoms are not easily subdued." Vexen's lips formed a thin smile, and for a heartbeat, Arya saw a flicker of something in his pale eyes. Was it contempt, or perhaps a trace of sympathy for the old lion? "Do you speak for the boy king, Tywin Lannister?" Vexen asked. "Did your grandson send you here to do what he cannot do himself?" The barb did not go unanswered. Tywin's scowl deepened, but he held himself in check. "Joffrey Baratheon, first of his name, is king of the Undulls and the First Men. He leads the realm. I am his hand. If you come to us with demands, speak them. Or is it only blood you desire?" Vexen cast a glance over the rest of the courtyard. Archers who had not fled still perched in the shattered towers, though none dared loose an arrow. "Blood is easy," Vexen said, "but I did not come solely for that. Your realm is at war. 5 kings vie for the crown. I will offer you a simple truth. There is now a 6th contender." His voice carried echoes in the hush. "You speak of your boy king, your lords, your golden lions, and their wealth. None of it will stand before fire and blood. Surrender Harrenhal to me and break ties with the false kings who sit on the Iron Throne. Declare for me Vexen of Valyria, and I might spare you. A ripple of disbelief moved through the Lannister men. They had never heard a man speak to Tywin Lannister with such boldness. The old lion himself steeled his gaze, trying to pierce the pretender's confidence. "You are mad," Tywin said plainly. "Mad like the Targaryen kings of old. If you think you can claim the entire realm by threatening me, you have misjudged. A single dragon, no matter how large, will not conquer the 7 kingdoms." Vexen's smile did not fade. "Perhaps not in a single day, but your 5 so-called kings are splintered, each fighting the other. Their unity is lost, and you have a boy wearing a golden crown in King's Landing. The coffers of the realm are drained by this war, and while the realm bleeds, I will bring the storm of dragons down upon them. You will see in time, Tywin Lannister. I am no mere pretender. I am a dragon lord. Balerion was mighty, but my beast is mightier still. Harrenhal's walls have already known what dragonfire can do." It was then that the men began to feel genuine panic roiling in their bellies. Nobody wanted to relive the horror that had once melted these black towers. Fear beaded on brows. Men remembered the destruction outside the fortress gates, how in the distance, farmland had been reduced to cinders. Though Tywin never turned his head to regard the charred remains of the soldiers who had tried to repel the intruder, the metallic tang of blood and ash was thick in the courtyard. Everyone who looked at that huge black dragon, scales shimmering even in the gloom, recognized the precariousness of their position. A swirl of wind sent a fresh wave of heat across the courtyard as carnage spread its massive wings, letting out a roar that shook the entire fortress. From a vantage point partially hidden behind broken steps, Arya Stark watched the exchange, every muscle in her body trembling. A swirl of possibilities spun in her mind. Tywin Lannister was the man behind many of her family's sorrows, an architect of the downfall of House Stark. She loathed him, yet, in this instant, she felt something near pity, to be confronted with a power that dwarfed even his cunning. The name Targaryen prickled in her memory. A secret part of her whispered that perhaps this new threat might avenge her father in a way she could never do alone. But vengeance and alliances were complex. Vexen burned Lannister men today, but would he also burn the Northmen tomorrow? She did not know. She only knew that war had grown more dangerous. Tywin's men made a slow retreat, giving space around their lord. It looked as if Tywin might attempt to parley further, but Carnage let out another snarling roar and coughed up a gout of flame that shot across the courtyard. Timbers from an old scaffold burst into an inferno, sending men scrambling. Vexen turned his gaze from Tywin to the cluster of terrified onlookers, scanning them with eyes that seemed alive with a flickering inner fire. It was then that Arya felt the weight of that gaze upon her. She did not stand out as anything remarkable, just a small, dirty girl in a group of other frightened souls. Yet something made Vexen narrow his eyes. Perhaps it was the defiance in her stance, or some intangible aura she radiated. Arya tried to shrink back, but she was too late. The Dragon Lord began walking with deliberate steps, ignoring Tywin's protests. The men parted before him as though they feared he might call his dragon's flame upon them if they hindered him. He stopped a few paces from her. She felt her throat tighten, any plan to speak choking in her lungs. For a moment, she wondered if he recognized her as Arya Stark, daughter of the man Joffrey had beheaded. But there was no sign of immediate recognition in his face. He tilted his head, looking at her as though trying to solve a riddle. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice low. She swallowed hard. She feared giving her true name, but giving a false one to such a man might be equally perilous. "Aerie," she managed, using the alias she had grown accustomed to. Vexen glanced back at Tywin. "Is this one of your wards, Lannister? Or just another servant?" Tywin's expression grew stony. Arya saw him weigh his next words carefully. Perhaps Tywin was deciding whether to reveal her identity, but he did not speak the name Arya Stark aloud. "She's a cupbearer," Tywin said icily, which was close enough to the truth. "Is she your concern?" Vexen's piercing eyes shifted back to Arya. She forced herself to meet his gaze, if only for a heartbeat. She saw something in those pale violet orbs, Yes, there was a swirl of curiosity, but also what felt like sorrow, or maybe a repressed anger. Whatever it was, she couldn't decipher it fully. The man who claimed to be the last Dragon Lord knelt slightly, so they were almost at eye level. She felt the heat radiate off him as though his veins pulsed with the same fire that raged within his dragon. "Have you ever seen a dragon before, Arya?" he asked. His tone was gentler than one might expect, especially after the carnage he had unleashed. She shook her head mutely, not trusting her voice. Then, she found the courage to squeak out a small reply. "No, not like this." What else could she say? Vexen's gaze flicked to his beast, which continued to prowl the courtyard, occasionally spewing embers at any unlucky soldier who ventured too close. "Few have," he murmured, "and none have seen one so large." A hush descended on the courtyard as Vexen stood once more. Tywin Lannister hadn't moved, but his men itched to do something, anything. Yet they were pinned by the threat of dragonfire. "You have made your point," Tywin called out, voice as cold as steel. "Are you here merely to terrify, or do you intend to negotiate?" Vexen did not turn around immediately. Instead, he gazed at Arya for another moment, as though committing her face to memory. Then he exhaled, shifting his shoulders as though shrugging off some intangible weight. "I have no illusions about forging alliances today," he said, finally pivoting to address Tywin. "You hold to your power the way the old kings of the Rock once did. But you are not that dissimilar from Harren the Black, who cowered behind thick walls only to be melted away. Consider this your sole warning. Surrender Harrenhal to me or see it burned again. Fire does not mind scorching the same ground twice." Tywin, though poised, looked at Vexen with narrowed eyes. "This fortress is already half ruined," he said. "Burn it if you wish, but you will not find me cowering inside. I will meet you on the battlefield." At that, Vexen barked a curt laugh. "Then you shall. But when you do, remember this day. Remember the might of carnage." He gestured to his dragon, snapping his fingers to call the beast close. Carnage lumbered forward, each step shattering the ground. Even its breathing was enough to make the hair on the back of the neck stand on end. The men parted in terror. The combined might of the Lannister ranks was powerless in that instant. Vexen climbed into the harness strapped across the dragon's broad neck and settled himself. With a thunderous beat of its wings, carnage kicked off from the ground. The force of it buffeted everyone in the courtyard, sending loose rubble tumbling. Dust and ash roiled into the air. Then, with a roar that must have been heard for miles, the dragon soared upward, carrying its master into the stormy skies. Arya could hardly believe she was still alive. Her heart hammered in her chest. She could see the yard from which the man and his monstrous mount had ascended. The ancient stone was scorched, men were blackened to cinders, and a hush of disbelief reigned among the survivors. Never had any of them seen such terrifying power. Some might have glimpsed smaller dragons in Volantis or heard rumors of the Targaryen girl across the sea, but to see a full-grown beast of such size battered the senses. In the echoing silence, a few of Tywin's men tried to muster courage to proclaim that they could kill the beast if it returned. But the tremor in their voices betrayed them. In their hearts, they all knew the truth. No ballista, no volley of arrows, nor even a scorpion bolt had been tested against anything so large. The old accounts said Balerian's hide was like steel, and if carnage was truly bigger, hope felt fleeting. Tywin's visage remained unreadable. He gave brisk commands. The men gathered to put out small fires, move the dead, and treat the injured. Though Harrenhal was used to ghost stories, the reality of the dragon's arrival was far more horrifying than any phantom. Through all this, Arya maintained her cover, though she was shaken to her core. She had stared into the eyes of the man who rode that dragon, and some part of her suspected that he might not have been deceived by her thin disguise. Why had he focused on her? The question gnawed at her. Perhaps there was something about the Stark features that was recognizable, even if she had tried to hide them. Or maybe he simply saw a child out of place and was curious. Nevertheless, she resolved to move carefully. Tywin might not care for her personal welfare, but he could use her as a pawn should he suspect she had any connection to Vexen. In the following days, Harrenhal bustled with panic. Tywin dispatched dozens of scouts and riders in all directions, seeking to confirm reports of the dragon's movements. One such unlucky patrol stumbled upon a ravaged campsite, the ground scorched black and littered with half-burned remains. There were rumors that Vexen was moving northward, or perhaps westward toward the mountains of the Vale, or perhaps deeper into the riverlands. The uncertainty served Vexen's cause as well as any open warfare, for nothing unsettled an army more than not knowing where their unstoppable foe might strike next. Meanwhile, in the north, Robb Stark and his bannermen marched south, hungry for retribution against the Lannisters for Ned Stark's execution and the atrocities in the Riverlands. The direwolf banners snapped in the wind, and victory in small skirmishes bolstered Robb's image among the Riverlords. Yet each rumor of this enormous dragon unsettled the northern host as well. If a new Targaryen claimant had truly surfaced, would he turn friend or foe to the north? And what of the cunning illusions that had lured Ned Stark to his demise in the first place? The father was dead, the house outraged, and now the fate of entire kingdoms might hinge upon the reemergence of a power long thought extinct. Ravens flew in a flurry of black wings from Harrenhal to King's Landing, bearing Tywin's urgent words to Cersei and Joffrey. Their contents were vague to those who did not read them personally, but the gist was clear. A new threat has emerged. War is complicated further. Cersei's response in the capital was as expected. She was both furious and worried. The Lannister hold on the throne was tenuous enough without some monstrous dragon lord tearing through their armies. Tyrion, the most analytical of the bunch, pointed out that if a dragon that large roamed the skies unchallenged, the ramifications could be dire indeed. Yet, as always, the Lannisters found themselves with too many battles to fight, too many fronts to guard, and too many enemies. The reappearance of a Valyrian heir who might stake a claim to the Iron Throne as the rightful Targaryen successor was a catastrophic threat to Joffrey's legitimacy. Though no official decree went out proclaiming Vexen an outlaw, the Lannisters prepared for hostilities. They loaded wagons with barrels of pitch, hoping to create rudimentary dragon traps or flaming catapults that could ground the beast. Blacksmiths labored day and night forging new, oversized crossbow bolts with barbed tips, reminiscent of the scorpion bolts used in legends. The best engineers among the Lannister forces tried to replicate old designs from stories of the dragon's downfall during the Dance of the Dragons, hoping that large enough siege weapons might at least wound the creature. Throughout the realm, everyone who could read or hear the news learned that the Lannisters were calling on their allies to remain vigilant for the monstrous black dragon, carnage, and its enigmatic rider. Somewhere amidst these machinations, Vexen used the advantage of flight to disappear from sight. He haunted the skies like a shade, striking vulnerable Lannister outposts or small encampments when it suited him, leaving behind smoldering rubble. The tall, lithe figure astride the dragon made no secret of his identity, always repeating that he was Vexen, last Dragon Lord of Valyria. Some men laughed nervously at the claim, thinking it some vain boast. Others, more steeped in knowledge, recalled the tragedies of old Valyria. Even Targaryens, who were of Valyrian descent, had lost their entire homeland to the doom. That Vexen named himself a direct dragon lord raised questions of how he had survived, how he had trained a beast so impossibly large, and how, if at all, he tied into the Targaryen lineage. But beyond these questions lay one stark truth. The War of the Five Kings was now overshadowed by a sixth would-be king, one who did not rely on loyal bannermen alone. He needed no thousands of knights to secure a field if he could simply burn them from above. Even the Tyrells, with their vast armies, or the Baratheons, with their stubborn fortresses, were not safe from dragonflame if the Black Leviathan soared overhead. What alliances might form in response to this new threat remained uncertain, but everyone agreed on one point. The realm had not seen such unstoppable power since the days of Aegon's conquest. Eventually, the seeds of fate brought the various armies converging once again in the Riverlands. The seat of Harrenhal, for all its curses, was deemed crucial. Tywin believed that controlling the fortress, even in partial ruin, gave him a vantage point over the region. He had commanded his forces to entrench around the perimeter, dig trenches, and fortify the existing towers with catapults or scorpions pointed skyward. Meanwhile, Robb Stark's northern forces were pushing south, seeking to liberate riverlords and cut off Tywin's supply lines. Scouts told Robb that the Lannisters were spread thin across the riverlands, making them vulnerable to a sudden strike. But overshadowing all strategic considerations was the rumor that the dragon might appear at any moment. Even a cunning plan could be undone by a single sweep of black wings and torrents of flame. At last, a day dawned cloudy and gray. Drizzle threatened, chilling the men's spirits. Harrenhal loomed against the dull sky, towers like melted wax statues. The outline of the fortress was a constant reminder of the Targaryen fire that had once melted it. The Lannisters had massed a large segment of their army outside Harrenhal's walls, forming ranks to face off against any who came. They expected to confront Robb Stark's vanguard. Instead, what arrived on the horizon was the shape of a dragon. The approach was swift, the roar deafening. The clouds parted like curtains torn by an unseen hand as carnage descended, wings blocking out the pale sun. Had it been a day earlier or a day later, the battle lines might have been positioned differently, but fortune or misfortune brought a concentrated mass of Lannister forces directly in the path of the beast. Men stood in dread as they saw the black scales glint, the red eyes flare with hellish light. Vexen swooped low, controlling his mount with a fluid grace, as though they shared one mind. A swirl of wind battered the flags and tents below, sending them whipping in all directions. Soldiers attempted to form arrow lines, but their fear outpaced their training. Only a few loosed arrows, and those that flew glanced harmlessly off the dragon's impenetrable scales or fell short. Then the fire rained down. A column of flame vomited from Carnage's maw, scouring a swath of the field in a matter of heartbeats. Armored knights were incinerated where they stood. The heat was so intense that men caught in the edge of the inferno collapsed screaming, their steel plates too hot to survive. Horses panicked, galloping into pikes or trampling men beneath their hooves. What had been a disciplined Lannister line moments before became a scattered ruin, men fleeing in all directions. The stench of burning flesh and melted metal strangled the air. From the battlements, Tywin cursed. He had suspected the dragon might strike here, but the scale of the destruction was worse than he feared. "Fire the scorpions," he bellowed. Two heavy siege weapons crafted to pivot skyward unleashed massive bolts toward the shadow in the sky. One soared wide, striking empty air. The other hissed dangerously close, but carnage rolled, gracefully banking away, and the bolt slid off the dragon's thick flank without piercing deep. A thunderous roar of pain and fury erupted from the beast, who retaliated with another sweep of flames that engulfed a portion of the ramparts. As stones cracked under the intense heat, Lannister archers hurled themselves over the walls rather than be roasted in place. At ground level, chaos reigned. Arya Stark, who had found herself near the fortress gates, still kept as a serving girl or forced labor under Lannister orders, watched with grim fascination. She saw men she hated, men whose house had orchestrated her father's death, writhing under dragonfire. Though she did not delight in death, she did not mourn them either. She could not tear her eyes away from the black dragon's savage might. She clutched the chipped wooden handle of a broom, heart pounding as the cacophony of destruction roared around her. Part of her almost wanted to cheer for the dragon, but she knew war was never so simple. If Vexen turned on the north next, it could be her own people who burned. Hatred for the Lannisters waged a silent battle with wariness of the new threat. Vexen directed carnage to land within the outer courtyard walls. The ground trembled again at the impact of the dragon's weight. Fire danced along the broken parapets. Men scattered, some trying to rally under hastily called orders, but morale was shattered. A pocket of Lannister soldiers formed a shield wall, obviously bracing for a ground assault. With a single gesture, Vexen urged the dragon forward, and Carnage's claws swept the men aside as if they were dolls. Another roar, another jet of flame, and the shield wall disintegrated into swirling sparks. Those who survived the first barrage turned tail to flee, ignoring the outraged shouts of their officers. In that moment, Arya realized the sheer enormity of the beast. Its wings could drape across half the courtyard. Its body was a sinuous mass of black scales, and its maw big enough to swallow a horse. She wondered if even Balerion had been this large, or if that were just a matter of perspective. Vexen leaped down from the saddle, sword at his hip, striding across blackened rubble. Although the fight was not entirely finished, pockets of Lannister resistance were already collapsing. He advanced with regal confidence, as if Harrenhal belonged to him by right, and he had merely come to collect it. Arya had been so spellbound that she failed to notice that Tywin Lannister stood upon a far walkway, surrounded by a cadre of crossbowmen. They took aim. Vexen, perhaps sensing the threat, ducked behind a fallen pillar just as the bolts hissed through the air. One of them clanged off the pillar, another soared wide. Carnage roared in protest, smashing its massive tail against the walkway. The structure crumbled beneath Tywin and his men. The scowling lord found himself forced to retreat or be crushed by the collapsing stone. Dust plumed in great clouds, and the vantage point was lost. For a moment the way was open, and Vexen made use of it. He advanced deeper into the courtyard, where a handful of Lannister knights tried to make a stand. Steel clashed, though they were no true match. One by one they fell to the ground, gutted or burned. Smoke curled off their cloaks and breastplates. The rest broke and ran, leaving Harrenhal's yard momentarily deserted, save for the dragon and its rider. Arya, uncertain if she should remain hidden or make her way out, took a hesitant step forward. She sensed an unearthly stillness blanketing the yard, punctuated only by the crackle of flames. Bodies and rubble cluttered the scorched ground. Then, without warning, Vexen caught sight of her. She froze, heart thumping against her ribs. He strode over, flames dancing behind him. Carnage lumbered after him, but the beast, noticing there was no immediate threat, slowed its pace and turned its red gaze upon the battered walls, perhaps seeking more foes. For a second time, Vexen and Arya faced each other. Dust and smoke obscured them, the swirling embers making it look like a scene from hell. Arya's face was streaked with soot, her eyes wide as the young wolf's. In the flickering light, Vexen could see she was indeed just a girl, far younger than any soldier. He took in the defiant set of her jaw, the haunted anguish in her eyes. He remembered her from that first encounter days earlier. Back then, she had worn the same clothing, but her presence had been overshadowed by Lannister men. Now, the fortress was nearly silent, except for the dragon's rumbling breath. "Arya, was it?" he said, voice low, barely audible above the crackling fires. He took a step closer, ignoring the carnage around them. The smell of burning hair and flesh was thick enough to make grown men gag, yet he showed no reaction, as if accustomed to war's brutal stench. Arya wasn't sure what to say. Some impulsive, reckless part of her wanted to draw her meager blade, needle, if she still had it, but of course she did not. She had no real weapon at hand, only a broom. She knew she stood no chance. Not against him, not with a monstrous dragon looming over them. "Yes," she managed. "Arya." His eyes seemed to pierce her, as though reading beyond her words. "Why do you stay in Harrenhal, Arya?" he asked quietly. "This is not a place for a child." She swallowed, trying to quell the tremble in her voice. "They keep me here, as a servant," she said, hoping not to reveal her true identity. Then, a flicker of her defiance slipped out. "I didn't choose it." Vexen's gaze flickered across her face, then to her short-cropped hair. "You're a Stark," he said, no trace of doubt in his tone. Arya felt her heart stop. She hadn't expected him to announce it so boldly. Fear curled in her stomach, but he continued. "I can see Ned Stark's eyes in you. Strange that Tywin Lannister would let you remain under his nose. Or perhaps he's using you as a hostage, though not publicly." Arya's mouth went dry. She barely knew how to respond. She could deny it, but the look in Vexen's eyes told her it would be pointless. "He doesn't know," she whispered. "I don't think he does." A ghost of a smile tugged at the corner of Vexen's mouth. "He does, or he suspects. But Tywin Lannister is a cunning man. He'd keep that knowledge for leverage." He paused, casting a glance at the raging dragon behind him. "Stark or not, you are not safe here. There are safer places in the realm if you can find them. But war roams everywhere. Winter is coming, as your house says. Are you loyal to your brother, the king in the north?" Arya felt a pang at the mention of Robb. She wondered if he was safe, if he knew she lived. "Of course I am," she muttered through clenched teeth. Vexen stared down at her, and for an instant, Arya thought she saw something akin to sympathy in his eyes. "Then you will want to leave before I set fire to all that remains here," he said, his tone quiet. "I have no quarrel with House Stark. My quarrel lies with the Lannisters and Baratheons who usurped Targaryen power. Robb Stark is not my immediate target." His words were calm, but Arya recognized the unwavering conviction beneath them. Vexen believed in his claim, or believed in his destiny, or perhaps believed in nothing but the dragon's fire. Regardless, this was a man who would reshape the land with blood if he deemed it necessary. She could not muster gratitude for the notion of being spared. She was too angry, too battered by the horror around her. "You're killing a lot of people," she said, the words escaping before she could stop them. Vexen did not flinch. "War kills," he replied evenly. "Dragonfire is the surest weapon in war. Ask Harren the Black if his spirit lingers in these melted towers." He stepped away, apparently satisfied that Arya posed no threat. "Go, find your brother, or bide your time. Do as you will. But don't stand between me and the Lannisters." His tone was not cruel, just factual, as though stating the obvious. He turned and gestured for Carnage to come closer. The giant beast lowered its head, smoke curling from its nostrils. Arya's mind whirled. She took a shaky step back, glancing around. Most of the yard was littered with rubble and bodies. In the distance, sporadic fighting continued, but Lannister forces were in disarray. If she lingered, she might be found by someone loyal to Tywin, or perhaps she'd get caught in more flames. She had no illusions that Vexen would coddle her if she stood in his path. She took another step back, not sure if she could trust the man's words, but seeing no other option. She began to make her way toward a side passage, half-collapsed but possibly leading to the fortress's outskirts. Before she disappeared, she cast one last glance over her shoulder. Vexen stood at the center of the courtyard, one hand resting against Carnage's scale-covered flank, as if he were comforting a friend. The dragon let out a low rumble. Then Vexen hoisted himself onto the saddle once again. He lifted his gaze to the towering fortress walls of Harrenhal. Though Tywin Lannister had not yet been killed, his men had been scattered. Vexen pressed his palm to Carnage's neck, and the dragon roared, unleashing a fresh tide of flame along the walls, crushing what remained of the Lannister defenders' morale. Arya made herself as small and quick as possible, slipping away through the gloom. The rest of that day passed in a haze of violence for those at Harrenhal. The fortress's main gatehouse was wreathed in fire. Tents outside the walls burned. Men fled in all directions, plunging into the riverlands. Some drowned in the river while trying to escape. Others, lost and leaderless, were caught by roving packs of wolves or outlaws. The once grand seat of Harrenhal was subjected to another taste of dragonfire, echoing the centuries-old devastation inflicted by Aegon the Conqueror. By nightfall, the flames had subsided enough for the battered walls to stand silent once more. Vexen and Carnage had soared off, leaving behind a scene of ruin. Tywin Lannister, battered but alive, regrouped with the remnants of his forces in one of the less collapsed wings of the fortress. Anger radiated from the old lion's every gesture. He had lost a substantial number of men in that single encounter, more than he'd lost in a typical pitched battle. The blow to his reputation was nearly as bad as the blow to his army. He was quick to blame incompetent captains, to vow retribution. But the deeper truth haunted him. Without a means to slay that dragon, no large Lannister force would ever be safe from the sky. Even if he destroyed the armies of the north or outmaneuvered the river lords, a single pass from Carnage could leave them all in ashes. Across the realm, whispers began to amplify. The War of the Five Kings was a misnomer now. There were 6 claimants to power, Some said Vexen had ties to the Targaryens, that perhaps he was an actual Targaryen scion from a secret branch. Others claimed he was something older, a Valyrian dragonlord who had no interest in the politics of Westeros except to see the land bend before his might. A few whispered that he might be a champion of some dark force, for how else could a dragon as big as or bigger than Balerion exist in this age? In taverns, travelers shared tall tales of black wings blotting out the sun, and entire Lannister patrols turning to ash in seconds. Fear gnawed at the hearts of small folk who had believed they had no stake in the great game of kings. Now, with a monstrous dragon in play, no one was truly safe. Arya Stark, for her part, escaped Harrenhal in the chaos. She slipped among fleeing servants and soldiers, making her way into the Riverlands with only scraps of food and her iron determination. The image of Vexen astride carnage lingered in her mind. It was impossible to forget the scale of that creature, the terrifying calm with which its rider carried out his vision. She did not know if he was friend or foe to the north, but she knew that if the day came for them to stand against him, it would be a day of terror. If the day came that he opposed the Lannisters again, perhaps that would bring a grim satisfaction. She carried these conflicting emotions with her, uncertain of what her future held, only sure that she had to find her family. Meanwhile, at the edges of the Westerlands, rumors spread faster than ravens. Families who once lived under the protective aegis of the Lannisters now trembled, uncertain if the Golden Lions could shield them from the black wings overhead. A few rebellious lords, disenchanted with Joffrey's cruelty or Tywin's iron grip, quietly sent feelers out, wondering if it was wiser to bend the knee to this new dragonlord rather than be scorched. Those old enough to remember the stories of Aegon's conquest recalled how swiftly lords capitulated once they saw dragons in the sky. The memory of thousands incinerated in fields and towns forced their hand. One dragon was worth more than 10,000 men, or so the saying went. Yet, Vexen's ultimate intentions remained inscrutable. He had not declared himself king outright, though he spoke of rightful claims. He burned Lannister forces wherever he found them, to be sure, but he did not parley with other houses, nor did he raise a large banner proclaiming himself a new Targaryen scion. Word was he was forging alliances with the Golden Company, who had served exiled Targaryens in the past. Perhaps he intended to reintroduce the old Targaryen motto, fire and blood, to the realm. Or perhaps he marched under a new motto, one that paid homage to Valyria's might. Only Vexen knew for certain. While these flames of rumor burned in the minds of lords and small folk alike, the war continued. Robb Stark pressed his advantage in the Riverlands, scoring victories that forced Tywin to retreat further. Stannis Baratheon gathered strength on Dragonstone, preparing to strike at King's Landing. Renley was dead, murdered under mysterious circumstances, some said by dark magic, leaving the Tyrell alliance to pivot toward the capital. Balon Greyjoy prowled the coasts of the north, capturing lands and harrying Robb's homeland. Through it all, King Joffrey preened on the Iron Throne, ordering spectacles of cruelty to entertain himself, while his mother scrambled to keep the realm together. Tyrion, hand over fist, tried to maintain some semblance of rational governance amid the madness, but the news of Vexen's unstoppable dragon overshadowed all else. As fields burned and storms gathered, the shape of the wars was changed irrevocably. Vexen had not yet stepped forward to claim a crown, but each day, more of the populace believed he would. Those who had grown tired of the Lannister tyranny saw in him a potential savior. Those who dreaded the destructive power of dragons saw in him a cataclysm waiting to happen. Lords who valued stability, or who might have sided with Stannis or Renley, now wondered if a union with a living dragon was the ultimate trump card. And so, even without large armies at his back, Vexen made himself a force to rival any claimant. Amid the swirling storms of war, one thing was certain. The reappearance of Dragonfire in Westeros could not be ignored. The Lannisters redoubled efforts to craft anti-dragon weapons, and rumors held that Qyburn, a disgraced maester dabbling in dark arts, might be recruited to find some twisted solution. King Joffrey, ever boastful, claimed he would hang the dragon's skull above the Iron Throne. Though behind closed doors, he trembled at the stories of Harrenhal's second scorching. Cersei considered marriage alliances or bribes, though she had little confidence that gold alone could seduce a man who commanded a beast mightier than an entire legion. Tyrion favored cunning, perhaps luring Vexen into a trap, though how to trap a dragon was beyond even his clever mind. In the Riverlands, the small folk whispered that Harrenhal was cursed indeed, for any who held it found misfortune. Now it lay partly in the hands of a phantom occupant. One day a handful of men loyal to Tywin might claim it, the next day Vexen might return and raze them to the ground. The fortress was effectively lost, a tomb overshadowed by the prospect of another dragon assault. No house was eager to claim it now. In the muddled chaos, Arya Stark rode with a small band of outlaws for a time, forging her own path away from the devastation. She replayed her brief exchange with Vexen, dissecting his words. "I have no quarrel with House Stark." She wanted to believe that might mean a shred of safety, but she knew better. Any man who so casually unleashed dragonfire was a hazard. Still, she had to find her brother. Somewhere beyond the treacherous roads and fords, beyond the potential watchful eyes of Lannister patrols, Robb Stark fought to avenge their father. If she could reach him, maybe she would be safe. Maybe they could warn the North of the new threat, or even forge an alliance if it benefited them. And if the day came when Vexen stood upon the field of battle against the Lannisters, she might find some twisted sense of justice in seeing them burned the way they had burned her family's hopes. Time in war is measured in heartbreak and opportunity. Tywin Lannister swiftly regrouped what forces he could, refortifying positions in the Westerlands and along the crossroads of the Riverlands. He did not abandon his pursuit of Robb Stark, but he became more cautious, never allowing his men to cluster too densely in open ground. Rumor had it that he studied old texts about the dance of dragons, seeking any advantage. At the same time, clandestine messages were sent to certain Targaryen loyalists across the narrow sea, hoping to glean secrets of how to fell a mighty beast. If Vexen truly had ties to the Golden Company, perhaps espionage or bribery might sow discord. Tywin was relentless in his pursuit of any strategy. And thus, the war raged on multiple fronts. King versus king, house versus house, and now, everyone versus the unimaginable might of a behemoth black dragon. Weeks passed, and the realm changed in subtle ways. Trade routes shifted to avoid the regions rumored to be haunted by carnage. The price of grain soared as farmland was set ablaze in the dragon's raids. Armies marched in slower, more scattered formations, always scanning the skies in dread. The maesters in their citadel at Old Town wrote furiously, some analyzing the genealogical possibilities of a new Valyrian line, others rummaging through ancient tomes on dragon lore. Each time a raven arrived with fresh news of Vexen's sightings, the links in their chains clinked with agitation. If dragons were truly reborn in such a monstrous form, what did it mean for the prophecy-laden beliefs about the return of magic and the possible second doom? Some speculated the White Walkers in the far north would be overshadowed by a new apocalypse of fire rather than ice. Vexen, for his part, did little to clarify his ambitions. He was neither a ghost nor a legend. Men saw him too frequently to doubt his existence. But he did not join the field in every skirmish, nor did he attempt to seize King's Landing outright, though the city was vulnerable in some respects. Instead, his campaign seemed methodical, burning Lannister supply lines, crippling the gold mines near Castamir's old ruins, demoralizing the armies by striking unexpectedly, then vanishing. After each strike, survivors claimed he mentioned his right to the throne, to the lands once held by his ancestors, though whether that was the Targaryen line or the entire legacy of Valyria remained unclear. The Lannister name, once enough to stifle opposition through gold and fear, now found itself overshadowed by the primal terror that was carnage. Doubt seeped into Tywin's ranks, and doubt, once sown, had a way of spreading. Mercenaries who had pledged swords to the Lannisters asked for double pay. Captains who once boasted that they feared no foe deserted their posts in the dark of night. Even common soldiers, who might have stood firm against typical cavalry charges, recoiled from the prospect of facing an unstoppable, fire-breathing dragon. Discipline became harder to enforce, and Tywin's famed intimidation held little weight against the threat of instant immolation from above. A rumor took hold among the rank and file that Vexen was unstoppable, that he had the blood of all old dragons in his veins. Some even claimed he was more demon than man. Yet Tywin was no stranger to near-impossible odds. He had outwitted more than one cunning foe in his lifetime. Even if his men whispered that Dragonfire was unstoppable, he vowed to find a way. He commanded his engineers to tinker with new scorpions, forging giant bolts made of black steel. He commanded archmasters or novices with knowledge of wildfire to attempt new concoctions that might harm the dragon. No expense was spared. He wanted to turn the weapon the Targaryens had once used into a tool for House Lannister. Wildfire had burned the Targaryen dynasty in King's Landing under the Mad King's final madness, so perhaps that same green flame could serve to fell Vexen's black beast. In King's Landing, the small folk caught wind of these efforts. Wagons bearing sealed casks of wildfire were seen entering the city. Though Tyrion Lannister tried to keep them under guard, rumors spread among the populace. They whispered that the Lannisters were creating a trap. The pyromancers churned out batch after batch of the volatile substance, stashing it in the deep vaults beneath the city. The tension in King's Landing rose higher, as any mishandling of wildfire could set off a chain reaction that would turn the city into a charred ruin. Joffrey demanded updates, occasionally threatening to execute pyromancers if they did not meet quotas. The entire capital grew to feel like a bowstring pulled taut, ready to snap at any moment. All the while, Vexen roamed, unchallenged in the skies, forging his own path. As the War of the Five Kings churned on, men and women began to speak of the War of Six Kings, though not always openly. Some said that the rightful king of Westeros was hidden no longer, that a Valyrian with a colossal dragon was more legitimate than a Baratheon bastard or an exiled Greyjoy. Others thought him a monstrous usurper who would bring more destruction than any warlord before him. The symbol of his power, carnage, became a bedtime terror for children and a real terror for the grown. In the face of such a dynamic shift, alliances realigned. Some houses that had sworn fealty to the Lannisters now began sending secret envoys to Vexen, offering fealty if he would promise them safe passage or a share of spoils. Unsurprisingly, those envoys seldom returned with clarity. Vexen did not trust easy alliances. He was rumored to spurn gold and empty words. What he sought was dominion, a bending of the knee in the ancient Targaryen sense, or total war. Soon, even the North began hearing more consistent tales of Dragonfire ravaging the Lannisters. Robb Stark's advisors wondered if the enemy of their enemy might be a friend. Some urged the young wolf to treat with this new Dragonlord, hoping to join forces to bring down the Lannisters. Others, more cautious, warned that a man who commanded such destructive might not settle for dividing the kingdom. It was better, they argued, to maintain independence from all southern claimants, whether they be Baratheons, Lannisters, or some re-emerged Valyrian. Amid this uncertainty, Robb pressed on, focusing on the battle before him rather than illusions of unstoppable dragons. He saw no sign that Vexen offered an alliance to the north. The news that Arya might still be alive had not yet reached him, though the faintest rumors trickled through the lines that a girl resembling her had fled Harrenhal. Hope flickered, but it was overshadowed by the practical demands of war. Still, the transformation of Harrenhal served as a potent symbol. In the aftermath of Vexen's victory there, few dared occupy the fortress. The Lannisters tried to regarrison it once or twice, but each attempt ended with the men slipping away in fear that the Black Dragon would return. The Riverlanders left the cursed castle alone, muttering that only ghosts and ashes remained within its melted walls. The fortress had fallen once to Dragonfire, and it had fallen again centuries later. If that was not a sign of doom for those who defied dragons, then what could be? Within that battered keep, the ghosts of centuries past might have stirred as wind whistled through scorched halls. If spirits existed at all, they would have recognized the stench of scorched flesh, the sound of roaring flames. The bones of those who perished in Aegon's conquest had found fresh company. The new watchers over the ruin were crows and ravens, feasting on the dead and cawing at any who dared approach. At night, the silhouettes of melted towers loomed like gnarled black fingers clutching at the sky. Meanwhile, on the far roads, Arya Stark persisted, each step a testament to her resolve. With the memory of Vexen's gaze and that monstrous dragon etched into her consciousness, she vowed to find her family. She clung to the faint hope that someday all the powers that had harmed House Stark would be brought to justice. Whether that justice included the black fire of carnage, she was not sure. She did not relish the idea of aligning herself with so ruthless a force, but the world was changing, and alliances in the face of war could be unpredictable. She felt a glimmer of something, call it dread or curiosity, wondering if she would cross paths with Vexen again. She carried with her a piece of that day, a sense that the realm was no longer the realm she had known as a child in Winterfell's courtyard. The old ways were crumbling. Dragons had returned in the shape of a nightmare larger than any living man had seen, and perhaps the entire world would burn before the storms ended. So it was that, in the weeks following Ned Stark's execution, Westeros found itself plunged even deeper into chaos. Vexen, having begun as a quiet, mysterious visitor in King's Landing, now blazed onto the stage of history, overshadowing other contenders with the terrifying might of carnage. From the Westerlands to the Riverlands, from King's Landing to the north, hearts quailed at the thought of facing a power thought extinct for over a century. Still, the cogs of war turned. Ravens carried missives of alliances, betrayals, and pleas for help. The people prayed to their seven, or to the old gods in the weirwood groves, or to the drowned god in the Iron Islands, or to no god at all, desperately hoping that some measure of peace might return. But with 6 kings now contesting the land, 5 wearing crowns of metal, and 1 with a living crown of flame, it seemed the rivers would only run redder before any peace could be found. For Vexen, the path was set. He had tested the might of House Lannister and found it wanting. He would not be satisfied until the throne was in his grasp, or until all who opposed him were ashes in the wind. Yet, like a skilled tactician, he did not rush the final confrontation. He circled the realm, letting fear do half the work. Men asked themselves, if a single sweep of dragonfire could shatter an army, what good were swords, horses, or even siege weapons? In the minds of lords and ladies, the memory of Aegon's conquest returned in chilling detail, bridging the gulf of centuries to remind them that in the face of a dragon, all were equal, equally flammable, equally mortal. Thus, the War of the 5 Kings became a misnomer. Across taverns and in high halls, people spoke now of the 6 kings. And beyond that immediate expansion of numbers, the real question was how the other 5 pretenders to the throne would respond to a new presence more formidable than any they had yet faced. Few had illusions that the Lannisters, the Baratheons, the Tyrells, or even the Starks alone could annihilate a dragon of Carnage's size. Perhaps the realm would need alliances. Perhaps they would attempt to pit Vexen against Daenerys Targaryen's younger dragons across the sea. Rumors even floated of a dance of the dragons reborn, with 2 scions of Valyria fighting for dominion, but that was speculation built on half-known whispers. In the end, the truth was simpler and more terrifying than any rumor. Vexen and Carnage were real, they were in Westeros, and they had laid waste to the Lannister host at Harrenhal. That alone was enough to see. Hang the war. The shockwaves of that event rippled out in every direction, carrying fear, confusion, and a dawning realization that the old order of knights and castles might not survive this conflagration. The wheels of fate continued to turn, and as the crows fed upon the blackened corpses of Harrenhal, the realm stood on the precipice of a new era, an era forged in flames hotter than any since the doom of Valyria. Whether that era would be heralded by Vexen's triumph or by his downfall, no one could say. But all believed that when the Black Dragon soared again, the world would hold its breath, because for the first time in a century and a half, the Dragon Lords had truly returned to Westeros, and they would not be denied. In the heart of Harrenhal's blackened courtyard, the echoes of the dragon's roar still clung to the stone. Fires had died down in most places, leaving only a bitter reek of soot, burned flesh, and the sting of acrid smoke that wandered the corridors like a restless phantom. The once proud Lannister encampment stood in ruins. Men wandered in a daze, bandaged heads or arms in slings, trying to piece together what little courage they had left after their devastating defeat. Nearly a quarter of Tywin Lannister's forces had been reduced to ash and char, a toll as unimaginable as the monstrous dragon that had swept through them. Tywin himself convened a war council in a partially intact hall, far enough from the stench and the rubble to grant them a sliver of dignity. Torchlight and the few rays of wan, dust-choked daylight that penetrated the high, damaged windows illuminated a scene of weary faces and battered armor. Lord Leford of the Golden Tooth, his normally fine tunic shredded and face smudged with ash, stood near a broken table. Lords Brax and Ser Gregor Clegane loomed in the gloom, each wrestling with shock in his own way. All of them wore the haunted look of men who had peered into the maw of oblivion and barely escaped. Tywin Lannister occupied what passed for a high seat, a large, half-toppled chair dragged in from an adjacent chamber. His face was an inscrutable mask, though an old anger smoldered in his gold-flecked eyes. He said little as he surveyed the men who remained. The collapse of Harrenhal's walls, the scorching of the courtyard, the high-pitched screams of horses and men alike. These images clung to the dust-laden air, impossible to banish. Even the memory of them was enough to induce shivers in the mightiest night. At last, Tywin spoke. His voice held that deceptively calm tone that all who served him had come to dread. Reports confirm that once this new Dragon Lord concluded his rampage, he took wing. A few of our scouts claim they saw him heading north. He paused, letting the word hang. North, with a dragon that, by the gods, may be bigger than Balerion the Black Dread. Murmurs rippled around the chamber. No one dared correct him. A few had glimpsed the monster at close range and could testify that its sheer size eclipsed anything out of story or song. Ser Gregor Clegane, arms folded, cast a dark look at the scarred walls, as though remembering the monstrous black shape that had reduced entire companies to embers in moments. Lord Brax, eyes still wide from his close brush with the flames, muttered something under his breath about black wings and red eyes. Lord Leford coughed into his fist, the sound ominously echoing in the chamber. Tywin locked his stare on each man present. "You all saw what it did," he said, voice sharpened by anger. "Fire from the sky. Thick walls and tens of thousands of men mean nothing before that beast if we have no proper defense. We must ensure that every lord loyal to House Lannister knows the gravity of this threat. Use ravens, use riders, spread the word across the Westerlands, across the Trident, and beyond. Let them know what we have witnessed here. A dragon the size of which no living soul in Westeros has seen. Balerion's memory haunts Harrenhal, and now it has been eclipsed." The men exchanged uneasy glances. They had never heard Tywin Lannister sound so close to disbelief. If Tywin himself was moved to such terms, that alone confirmed the full scope of the disaster. Silence hung in the air. Outside, a gust of wind funneled through the cracked windows, making the torches shiver. At length, Lord Leford managed to clear his throat. "My lord, should we not consider rallying more men to the fortress? Or perhaps withdrawing entirely if the dragon might return?" Tywin's gaze pinned him. "Harrenhal is lost for the moment. We cannot hold what we cannot defend." His voice never rose, but a sense of finality pressed against every mind in the room. "Spread out. No more gathering of thousands in a single spot. That is how they destroyed us, one sweep of flame against a dense cluster. Small units on the move. We keep our strength scattered, difficult to pin down from the sky. That is the only temporary measure we have." He rose, his armor glinting in the torchlight, revealing fresh scuffs and smoke-blackened edges from the inferno. "Send word to the capital. I will write instructions for my children to read. The king on the Iron Throne must understand the threat. Alert our allies. All must know that this Vexen controls a dragon mightier than Balerion." With that, Tywin dismissed the gathering. Bowing and murmuring hurried farewells, the lords and knights filtered out. No one spoke of victory. Survival was the only ambition on their faces. In the corridor outside, ravens were already being fitted with tiny scrolls to be sent throughout the realms. Riders, too, prepared to bear tidings. Ill news travels fastest when spurred by terror. Before the sun had dipped below the watery horizon, a half-dozen ravens were aloft, each one carrying a grim dispatch that would soon set the entire realm whispering of a new horror. The first to receive the tidings was King Joffrey Baratheon in King's Landing. The capital festered with tension as the War of the Five Kings raged on. Yet for all the strife, King's Landing seldom felt immediate fear. It was the seat of the Iron Throne with high walls, and it was the center of Lannister might. Joffrey presided over the court with the arrogance of youth and the cruelty that had already earned him infamy. When the raven bearing Tywin's news arrived, the missive was taken straight to Queen Cersei. A hush fell across the small council chamber as she broke the seal, eyes skimming across the parchment. Her expression twisted into a complicated mask. Disbelief, anger, and an undercurrent of alarm. Tyrion Lannister, the acting hand of the king in Tywin's absence, noticed instantly. Cersei wasted no time. "Clear the room," she ordered. Varys's eyes widened, Littlefinger's fingers twitched, and Pycelle opened his mouth to protest. But none dared test her. In moments, only Tyrion, Joffrey, and Cersei remained. Joffrey was sprawled on the Iron Throne itself, idly scuffing its ancient metal with his boot. He wore a petulant sneer, clearly irritated at being kept in the dark. "What does grandfather say?" he demanded, voice shrill. "Has he crushed those stupid northerners yet?" Cersei's hand trembled slightly with the letter. "No," she said quietly. "Not exactly. The North is only part of the problem." She handed the parchment to Tyrion without a word, letting him see for himself. Tyrion read in silence. His mismatched eyes flicked over the lines describing Harrenhal's devastation. Men turned to ash in a single sweep of flame, and Tywin's reluctant admission. "The dragon is bigger than Balerion the Dread." The last words seemed to leap from the parchment. A hush filled the chamber for several heartbeats. Joffrey leaned forward. "Well?" he snapped, impatience saturating his tone. "You look like you've both seen a ghost." "Worse than a ghost," Tyrion said softly, folding the parchment. "Your grandfather has lost a significant portion of his forces at Harrenhal. They were burned by a dragon." "A dragon?" Joffrey scoffed. He flicked a glance between Tyrion and Cersei, searching for some hint that this might be a jest. "Dragons are gone. All that's left are those shriveled skulls in the Red Keep." Cersei inhaled carefully. "Not gone, if this letter is to be believed. Your grandfather saw it, Joffrey. A beast that dwarfs even what the stories say of Balerion's size." The boy king's eyes narrowed. "He's exaggerating. Grandfather is just being cautious. No dragon can be bigger than Balerion was." He paused, an expression of contempt folding into a smirk. "But if it's true, we'll have it killed. We'll mount its head in the throne room next to the others." Tyrion resisted the urge to roll his eyes at the bravado. "That is precisely what Aegon the Conqueror's foes once thought," he said, tone wry. "Before they were burned alive in the Field of Fire, dragons destroyed Harrenhal before. It seems they have done it again." "Dragons," Joffrey repeated, as if tasting the word. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. "But how? That Targaryen girl across the sea was rumored to have some whelps. But they can't be as large as—" He broke off, frustration overtaking him. "Who controls it?" Cersei's lips thinned. "A man calling himself Vexen. It seems he presented himself some time ago, possibly to negotiate with us through the Golden Company. Now he has emerged as a pretender, a dragon lord, or so Tywin says." Joffrey struck the throne's arm with his fist. "He's an upstart traitor. Then, if he defies the crown, we'll flay him alive, we'll—" "Threats won't help us here," Tyrion interrupted, too weary to be diplomatic. "Nor will your typical solution to any problem. This is not some hedge knight or rebellious lord. This is a man with a beast capable of incinerating entire armies in a single pass. We need to be very clever about this." Joffrey's face reddened. "Are you frightened, uncle?" "I'm not. We have the city walls, we have men, we have siege engines." Cersei reached to still her son's tirade. "And if he decides to fly over them, what then? Burning men from above? Unstoppable." She shook her head, trying to maintain a veneer of composure. "We will answer your grandfather's request. We'll accelerate our efforts with the alchemists. If wildfire can burn fleets, it may be the only thing that can burn a dragon. We have to be prepared." Tyrion nodded grimly. He had already been coordinating with the Pyromancers Guild for a potential assault from Stannis' fleet, but a dragon added a new dimension of horror. Wildfire was dangerous, especially stored in massive quantities beneath the city. Yet it might be their only hope if the beast came for King's Landing. "Very well," said Joffrey, though his tone was sulky. "But when we capture that dragon, I want its skull to be bigger than all the others in the Red Keep. I want it displayed so everyone knows the price of defying me." Tyrion did not dignify that with a response. The conversation turned to logistics, how to muster more men, how to keep the city calm, how to glean any knowledge from old scrolls about killing dragons. All the while, the phrase "bigger than Balerion" resonated in their minds like a dirge. They had not yet faced the beast, but the knowledge of its existence weighed heavily on them. For the first time in decades, the capital's power seemed fragile, dwarfed by the specter of unstoppable fire from the sky. Far from the bustle of the capital, on the storm-lashed battlements of Dragonstone, King Stannis Baratheon stood staring at the Black Sea below. The gloom of a brooding twilight matched his perpetual scowl. In one hand he clutched a new Raven's message, which his maester had delivered moments ago. Around him, the wind tore at the banners showing the fiery heart of the Lord of Light. Stannis' chosen sigil, born of his devotion to Lawler through his Red Priestess, Melisandre. Behind him, as ever, stood Davos Seaworth, the Onion Knight, his posture deferential. Beyond them in the courtyard, a handful of Dragonstone's guards hurried about their tasks, too soaked in brine and sea spray to eavesdrop. The storms that gave the island and the Baratheons their name raged in the distance, undercutting any notion of a quiet evening. Stannis broke the tense silence. "Read it for yourself, Davos," he said, extending the parchment. "I'd swear it was a piece of madness if I did not trust the chain of sources. This one claims it comes from Harrenhal by way of Rosby, and then from Rosby to Dragonstone." Davos accepted the letter, his brow furrowed as he scanned the lines. "A dragon," he murmured in disbelief. "A monstrous dragon in Westeros, said to be bigger than the Black Dread of old." He lifted his eyes. "My lord, is it possible?" Stannis' jaw flexed. "I once would have thought it impossible for shadows to kill a king in his tent, yet I saw to the contrary. Dark forces stir, or perhaps bright forces. I can't pretend I understand them all. But if the Lannisters have truly encountered such a beast, it changes matters. Even in ancient days, no mortal army could simply stand against dragonfire. Perhaps it's a rumor conjured to sow chaos," Davos offered. "A man with a dragon claims dominion. He might be using fear alone to weaken House Lannister." Stannis let out a short, bitter laugh. "I don't doubt the Lannisters have indeed been attacked. My brother's ravens from the Reach mention the same rumor. Renly's allies might not know half the truth, but they believe Harrenhal is in smoldering ruin." Davos hesitated. His memories drifted back to seeing Stannis' peculiar brand of unstoppable conviction. If the beast is real, it could turn the tide of this war. The Lannisters may have money and cunning, but against a dragon, their gold will melt like anything else. A flicker of satisfaction might have passed over Stannis' solemn features. "Then let them be consumed by their own arrogance. I shall not mourn Tywin Lannister." But almost immediately, his expression sobered again. "Yet a dragon with a rider is a claim to the throne, if ever there was one. The Targaryens seized the Seven Kingdoms with that advantage. If this Vexen is truly a Valyrian of some sort, or even a Targaryen pretender, then he claims the same right Aegon once had. Where does that leave me, Davos? I have the best claim by law. My nephew is a bastard, the product of incest, and I am Robert's rightful heir. But the lords of Westeros love power, not necessarily law." Davos offered a pragmatic nod. "You speak truly, my king. Many might bend the knee to a dragon rather than risk fire." Stannis' eyes flicked with a fierce, cold determination. "My cause is just. I am the rightful king. The Lord of Light favors me." He clenched his jaw. If this new pretender tries to stand between me and the Iron Throne, I shall show him the strength of Renley. Fire answers only to greater fire, perhaps. Just then, a swirl of red silk heralded Melisandre's approach. The Red Woman joined them on the windy battlement, her face bearing that enigmatic smile. She looked as though the chill wind scarcely touched her. "You speak of dragons," she said in her soft, accented voice, as though reading their conversation from the sea's spray. "The old power is waking, my king. The night is dark and full of terrors, as you well know, but the fires burn brighter. This is only the beginning." Stannis eyed her, searching her face. "What do you see in your flames about this monstrous creature?" Melisandre's eyes gleamed with fervor. "I see shadows twisting in the shape of wings, Stannis Baratheon, and I see a single brilliant light that might overshadow them all. We stand at the brink of a vast conflict. The gods have not revealed the final outcome, but I know you must press onward with your destiny. If a dragon stands in your path, then the Lord of Light shall guide you to victory if you keep faith." There was a moment of stillness, broken only by the crashing waves below. Davos, more grounded in his perspective, did not speak. He simply watched Stannis, whose rigid features betrayed the war of doubt and conviction that perpetually raged inside him. "We shall see," said Stannis at last. "If the gods will it, we shall see which flame burns hotter. For now, we continue our preparations. The Lannisters are not the only threat, but if Tywin's men have been weakened, that could offer an opening. One does not lightly ignore news of a dragon, and if it threatens my realm, I shall face it, whether by steel or by sorcery." So saying, he turned away from the parapet, his mind already racing with the complexities of war. He ordered ravens sent to his outposts and bannermen, ensuring they too understood what had transpired at Harrenhal, how a single pass of flame had undone the fortress that once defied Aegon the Conqueror. And though no one knew the new Dragonlord's next move, the knowledge that House Lannister had been so thoroughly scorched put a calculating gleam in Stannis' eye. Meanwhile, in the fertile fields south of the Blackwater Rush, the wind ruffled banners of turquoise and gold, the sigil of House Baratheon of the Stormlands, quartered with the golden rose of House Tyrell for those knights sworn to the alliance. A thriving host of many thousands had gathered under King Renley Baratheon's flamboyant leadership, though rumors of friction had long spread through the ranks. Renley stood in his luxurious campaign pavilion. Outside, the golden evening sun bathed the meadows, making them shimmer with life. The smell of fresh hay and wildflowers drifted into the tent, a far cry from the charnel stench around Harrenhal. Inside, however, tension laced the air. Renley was reading the words of a letter in silence, brow furrowed. Ser Loras Tyrell, resplendent in shining plate, stood by the opening flap, arms crossed. Margaery Tyrell, Renly's queen, sat upon a cushioned seat, expression drawn tight with concern. Around them, a handful of knights and advisors waited for Renly's reaction. After a moment, he lowered the parchment and looked at his companions. "It appears the impossible has happened," Renley said, with a dryness that hinted at deep worry. "A dragon has come forth in the Riverlands, commanded by a man claiming Valyrian blood. Grand, black, and enormous, bigger, they say, than Balerion the Dread." Marjorie's brown eyes flicked with surprise. "Surely a rumor?" Renley exhaled, passing the parchment to her. "I would dismiss it as such if I had only one report, but I have three from three separate messengers, two of whom I trust. Each tells the same tale of Harrenhal in flames, of men turned to cinders, and Tywin Lannister forced to flee." Loras stepped closer, frowning. "If the Lannisters have been struck a mortal blow, that's good news for us. With Tywin crippled, we can move more boldly." Renley tapped a finger on the table, where a map of the Crownlands lay spread. "Yes, it's good news insofar as it weakens the Lannisters, but a dragon is no trifling matter. It took Aegon Targaryen and his sisters little time to break the might of the Seven Kingdoms when they had dragons at their command. And this beast is described as monstrous beyond measure. It changes the balance of everything." Margaery, scanning the text, asked quietly, "Does the letter say who leads it?" Renly's lips parted in a faint grimace. "He calls himself Vexen, possibly some new Targaryen claimant, or perhaps he's just an ambitious Valyrian with a legitimate dragon. Whatever he is, it seems he's unstoppable in open battle." Ser Loras looked troubled. If he has any ties to the Targaryens, might he claim the Iron Throne as well? This war is complicated enough without a sixth competitor. "Indeed," Renly murmured. "Joffrey Street. Annis, Robb Stark, Balon Greyjoy, and myself, that's 5. Now a sixth with a dragon that can burn cities. The realm bleeds enough as it is. Another claim of this magnitude might bring the entire land to its knees." He paced the length of the pavilion, the hem of his fine cloak swishing across the grass and rug floor. He paused near Marjorie. "And yet, as you said, the Lannisters have taken a grievous blow. Harrenhal was a strong pivot in the Riverlands. If Tywin has lost a good portion of his men, we might make a swift move on King's Landing before he can recover. The question is, do we risk the possibility of this dragon turning up there?" Marjorie's tone was thoughtful. "Perhaps you might secure an alliance with him, this Vexen, if he, too, stands opposed to the Lannisters?" Renly gave her a gentle, wry smile. "My dear, alliances are made with men, not monsters. We know nothing about him, other than that he can roast us alive. Approaching such a power is risky, and we do not know his demands. He could want the entire realm for himself." Loras met his gaze. "If we tarry, Stannis might press his advantage. I don't trust him not to find some dark magic to strike quickly. Better we press forward with our own rightful claim. You have the greater strength of arms here. The Tyrells stand with you. The Stormlands are behind you. The realm will flock to your banner if you can remove Joffrey." A sigh escaped Renly. He cast a glance back at the parchment. "Very well. We continue our plans to march on King's Landing. But we keep a close watch for any sign of a dragon. If the gods are just, perhaps this rumored beast will remain busy harrying Tywin." He paused, and a fleeting shadow crossed his features. "Yet I cannot help but recall the stories. Harren the Black believed his fortress impregnable, and the Dragonfire melted those thick walls like butter. If King's Landing is attacked in the same manner..." He did not finish, letting the scenario hang unspoken. Even if Renly marched in triumph to seize the city, a single pass of Dragonflame could undo all his ambitions, raising a lifetime of hope in a day. Marjorie placed a hand on his arm, offering silent reassurance. He patted her hand in return and squared his shoulders. "Send out our own riders," he told a trusted knight. "Confirm the news. Let every lord who has sworn to me know that the Lannisters are vulnerable. If the moment is right, we'll strike. But keep your eyes on the skies. Should we see black wings overhead?" He left the rest unsaid. At Riverrun, or in the Riverlands at large, King Robb Stark, the so-called king in the north, found himself convening with his principal lords by the flickering light of an evening fire. The direwolf banners stirred in the breeze outside. Within a makeshift command tent, Robb stood over a war table, the map before him weighed down by daggers and a wolf's head carving. Present were the great Jon Umber, Roose Bolton, and a handful of other lords loyal to the north. Robb's expression was grim. The news that had come on raven wings was read aloud by one of his advisors. The Northerners listened with a strange mixture of fascination and horror. A dragon, at Harrenhal, bigger than Balerion. An entire Lannister force in flames. Tywin forced to flee. When the reading ended, the great Jon shook his shaggy head in disbelief, but also let out a booming laugh that reverberated in the tent. I'd say it's a fine day when the Lannisters get scorched," he bellowed. "No offense to your father's memory, but I'd have loved to see that arrogant old lion running from a beast of legend." "Offense or no, we can't dismiss it that lightly," Robb said. Though he was young, the weight of command had sharpened his caution. "I won't mourn the Lannisters' losses, but if this dragon can burn Tywin's host, it can burn ours." Roose Bolton's quiet voice slipped into the pause. "Precisely. The Targaryens conquered Westeros with dragons. A single pass of flame can destroy years of strategic gains. We must be mindful. If it roams where it pleases, no castle is truly safe. A thoughtful hush followed. The northern lords were not men easily cowed, but tales of living dragons unsettled them. The sagas told of the Long Night and the Age of Heroes, but also of Targaryen devastation in the more recent centuries. Even the thick walls of Winterfell were not built to withstand dragonfire, nor had the men of the north faced such an enemy in living memory. Robb drummed his fingers on the war map. The letter mentions the beast's rider Vexen, a Valyrian. If he claims some Targaryen inheritance, he may well believe himself rightful king. That would make it 6 of us in total, for I cannot see him bending the knee to any of the others. 6 kings, the great Jon scoffed, though the mirth in his voice carried an edge of worry. It's a wonder the realm hasn't torn itself into 6 pieces, and now a dragon might incinerate the lot of us. Robb looked at the men around him. Let's consider what advantage this might offer us in the immediate moment. Tywin is broken at Harrenhal. That means the Lannisters will be more cautious. They won't easily assemble a massive host to crush us. If we can maneuver swiftly, we might secure more of the Riverlands, or even threaten the road south. We have our alliance with the Freys, tenuous though it may be. The Lannisters can't be everywhere at once, and they're short of men. Bolton nodded. Striking now could indeed yield gains. We must be wary, however, that we don't stumble into the path of that dragon. If it appears unannounced. I know, Robb cut in. That's a risk. But if we cower in fear, we'll never achieve what we set out to do. Avenge my father, restore the North's independence, and break the Lannisters' grip on the Riverlands. Lord Karstark, quiet until then, spoke up. If this Vexen truly aims to challenge the throne, perhaps we can parley with him. The North never had a love for the Lannisters. If this Dragon Lord despises them as well, might we strike a pact? Robb frowned thoughtfully. That's a question, but we know too little about him. For all we know, he might decide to burn the North just as easily as he burned the Lannisters. There's no guarantee he'd respect our independence. The Targaryens demanded fealty from every corner of Westeros in their time. The great Jon ran a hand through his thick beard. Let him try. The North is vast, and winter is coming. Not even dragons like to freeze. I'll wager. He gave a half-grin, though it did not quite reach his eyes. Robb managed a thin smile. We shouldn't rely on the cold alone. He tapped the map again. Here's what we do. We push forward with careful strikes against Lannister outposts in the Riverlands. Take advantage of their weakness. Keep our forces scattered enough so we're not an easy target from above, but close enough to unite if the Lannisters muster a counterattack. There were nods all around. The conversation turned to logistics, scouting, and supply lines. Yet throughout the council, the specter of the dragon hovered in every silent moment. A rumor of black wings bigger than Valyrian was not something they could dismiss as folklore. The war had grown more complicated. The chessboard had a brand new piece whose power dwarfed that of kings and their armies. After the council broke, Robb stepped out into the Riverlands air, inhaling the scent of pines and the faint tang of the river. His thoughts drifted to Arya, to Sansa, to his mother, each separated from him in different ways. The realm was in chaos, and now a monstrous dragon soared the skies. Yet a part of him, the newly hardened War King, felt a grim satisfaction that at least Tywin Lannister's might had been dealt a blow. The battlefield favored those who acted boldly in times of flux. He told himself he would be ready, come what may, even if that what may was a firestorm from the heavens. In the Iron Islands, far from the mainland's rivers and fields, the wind carried the smell of salt and rotting kelp. The spray of the sea was constant, and the rocky spires of Pike jutted from the ocean like broken teeth. King Balon Greyjoy sat in the damp hall that overlooked the restless waves, a brazier burning nearby to fight off the chill. Around him, the drowned men muttered prayers to the drowned god, and the lords of the Isles shifted restlessly, never quite comfortable on any seat that was not a ship's deck. The messenger stood near the entrance, still dripping from the rough boat ride that had brought him here. Water pooled beneath his boots. He held a parchment in a trembling hand, uncertain of the reception. Balon Greyjoy's face was carved in stone. He beckoned the messenger forward with a curt motion, snatched the parchment, and dismissed him. His daughter, Yara or Asha, to those who refused to use her southern name, leaned against a pillar of slick stone, arms folded. "What does it say, father?" Balon ran his eyes over the words, mouth curving in a skeptical sneer. Harrenhal was attacked. Tywin Lannister's army burned. The culprit, they say, is a dragon bigger than Valyrian, if you'll believe that, commanded by some Valyrian who calls himself Vexen. Yara snorted a laugh, half in disbelief. "Dragons. Next you'll be telling me the children of the forest walk again." Balon let the missive fall to a wet table. "We've all heard rumors the Targaryen girl across the sea has a few hatchlings. I never paid it much mind. Essos is far from the Iron Islands. But if the Lannisters truly lost Harrenhal to a dragon, that's no trifling rumor." He rose, striding to the window where the waves churned below. Storm clouds loomed on the horizon, typical weather for the Iron Islands. They say it dwarfs any of the skulls kept in the Red Keep. I recall seeing those once as a younger man. If that was the size of Valyrian, this creature must be near a living mountain of flesh and fire. Yara, pragmatic in her approach, came forward. "If the Lannisters have been crippled, does that not work to our advantage? With fewer men to guard the Westerlands, we can raid more boldly, seize more coastline, hold more of the neck. We already hold Moat Cailin. The north is scattered, and the Lannisters can't stop us if they're licking wounds from dragonfire." Balon gave a low, approving hum. "Yes, the Wolf King and the Lion King both have problems. The wolves fight in the south, the lions scatter from Harrenhal. That leaves plenty of room for the Kraken to strike." A grin flickered on Yara's lips. "Then we move swiftly." One of Balon's younger lords, Dagmar Cleftjaw, stepped from the shadows. He was an older reaver with a face that looked like he'd lived 3 lifetimes on harsh seas. "But what if the beast comes for us? The Greyjoy rebellion ended when the mainland's armies burned our keeps. That was only normal fire. A dragon's flame could reduce Pike to rubble." Balon's glare cut him short. "We do not cower from any flame, least of all one that might never trouble us. The Ironborn are not so easily cowed. Let the dragon circle over the green lands. We do not need to gather in large hosts on a battlefield. We strike by sea, from the shadows of the waves, in small, swift forces. A dragon cannot be everywhere at once." His gaze flicked to Yara. "Our advantage is the sea, which no Targaryen, nor any Valyrian upstart, has ever truly mastered. If the beast tries to meet us on our waters, it risks flying into the open storms of the Iron Islands. We are not the fools of the mainland. We do not sit behind stone walls waiting to be burned. That is Harren the Black's folly, not ours." A hush fell. Outside, the wind howled, slapping waves against the rocks. Balon's words rang with the old pride of the Ironborn, who revered the sea above all else. Yara studied her father's face, searching for a hint of doubt, but found none. Balon Greyjoy was a flinty man whose ambitions had not faded. If there truly was a dragon scouring the Lannisters, so much the better for the Iron Islands, in his mind. Let the Greenlanders tear each other apart, or be burned by living flame. Pike could exploit the chaos. "We'll press our raids," Balon decided, turning from the window. "That's how we carve out our kingdom. Let the others fear the beast that soared over Harrenhal. The Kraken has its own domain. We'll strike while the realm is too busy quaking at a new Targaryen threat." He paused, pushing aside a wet lock of hair that clung to his forehead. "Send out the word to our captains. We do not gather in large fleets in one place. No sense making ourselves a bigger target than needed. But we do not halt our aggression. King Balon Greyjoy does not kneel, be it to a boy on the Iron Throne, a Wolf King in the north, or a dragon. The Seastone chair is mine by the old way. Let them all burn if they must. We will endure." The men around him murmured assent. Even Dagmar, momentarily cowed by the specter of dragonfire, nodded in respect to Balon's unyielding stance. Yara straightened her shoulders, recalling the old words of the Ironborn. What is dead may never die, but rises again, harder and stronger. She found a certain grim pride in it, even as a small voice inside her considered the practicality. A single pass of unstoppable flame might be enough to turn any fortress or any village to ashes. But the sea was their shield, their way of life. Let the black wings shadow the mainland. Yara's immediate concern was turning the war to the Iron Islands' advantage, carving out a kingdom amid the chaos. And so, from King's Landing to the windswept ramparts of Pike, from the green fields where Renley Baratheon's host gathered to the roughshod tents of Robb Stark's camp, the same rumor churned through the hearts of soldiers and lords alike. A dragon bigger than Balerion, commanded by a man who called himself a Valyrian heir, had incinerated Tywin Lannister's army at Harrenhal. The War of the Five Kings had abruptly become a quagmire of 6 claimants, or so the talk went, for no man who controlled such a beast could be content as a mere bystander. In every castle hall, every roadside inn, every farmstead, the news spread swiftly. Some recounted the swirling flames and molten stone as if they had witnessed it personally. Others spun wilder yarns, claiming the beast blotted out the entire sky, that its roar shook the earth for leagues around, that it could swallow a warhorse whole. Whether half-truths or exaggerations, the underlying fact remained. Tywin Lannister had been dealt a blow that changed the shape of the war, and overhead loomed the memory of black wings. In King's Landing, Tyrion scrambled to expand the city's wildfire production, each new cask locked away in vaults below the streets. He had no illusions that the city, with all its walls, could withstand a siege from the air. The best he could do was plan for the worst, consult old tomes on the dragon's vulnerabilities, and attempt to maintain some semblance of order among the frightened people. Joffrey, meanwhile, boasted publicly that he would slay the beast himself, convening public addresses in which he declared that any threat to his rule would end impaled on a spike, even a monstrous dragon. The small folk, behind closed doors, repeated these threats with bitter sarcasm. They had watched how Joffrey handled simpler tasks. The notion of him bringing down an ancient terror seemed laughably remote. In Dragonstone, Stannis gazed into Melisandre's fires each night, seeking glimpses of the wars to come, as storms pounded the fortress walls. The Red Priestess spoke cryptic warnings of shadows and wings, while Davos reminded his king of more mundane matters. Men to feed, ships to man, a fleet to prepare. Yet the knowledge that Tywin Lannister might never again field a force as large as before gave Stannis pause. He might outmaneuver his enemies on land, if only the dragon did not upset all calculations by picking a side or, more likely, burning them all indiscriminately. In Renly's camp, the Tyrell soldiers whispered excitedly that King's Landing might fall more easily. They polished their armor, practiced cavalry maneuvers, and speculated what a bigger-than-Balerion dragon truly looked like. Some even boasted that a well-placed arrow from a skilled archer could bring it down, though older knights shook their heads, recalling stories of how Maegor and other Targaryens had proven such bravado false. Renly, restless in the night, confided to Marjorie that if the beast attacked, his beautiful host might not be able to stand even a single day. She advised him to rally the realm's hearts before fear overcame them. In the Riverlands, Robb Stark marched steadily, capturing more Lannister-held territory while sending outriders to scout the roads for any new threat. The memory of Ned Stark's execution and the news that Arya was missing still weighed on him. If the realm saw the rise of a new Dragon King, what would it mean for the North's independence? For the safety of his siblings? Catelyn Stark, upon hearing the rumor, pressed her son to be cautious. She remembered well the tales of Aegon's conquest. No army could stand unscathed against Dragonfire. And yet, the chance to exploit Tywin's weakness was too great a lure to pass up. On the Iron Islands, Balon Greyjoy prepared to exploit the chaos on the mainland, sending out swift longships to raid coasts, paying minimal heed to the possibility of a dragon overhead. The men who followed him repeated the old saying that the drowned god's realm was eternal, that no lord of the sky could defeat the waves. But in hushed corners, some sea captains wondered how true that was if the dragon's flames soared over the bay itself. Still, the old way demanded plunder, demanded fearlessness in the face of adversity, and so they pressed on, unconcerned with the so-called New Valyrian claim. Throughout these lands, the same refrain was repeated. A dragon bigger than Valyrian? Can you imagine? Lords questioned their maesters for any scraps of knowledge regarding the vulnerabilities of dragons. The maesters in Old Town scoured ancient scrolls for references to the largest Targaryen dragons, or to the rumored survivors of Valyria. Their studies yielded only fragmentary accounts, illusions of half-mythic beasts roaming Sithorios, or cryptic mentions of the cannibal dragons that once lived on Dragonstone. But none of it provided a perfect key to slaying a dragon with certainty. Cautious lords braced themselves, avoiding massing too many men in open fields, lest they meet the same fate as Tywin's host at Harrenhal. They believed, perhaps prayed, that so large a beast would be slow to fly long distances. They posted extra watchmen on tower tops, scanning the horizon for black wings. Any swirling formation of clouds became suspect. Caravans passing near the edges of the Westerlands were hyper-alert to any unnatural roar. The terror of seeing an entire legion immolated in minutes, as recounted by traumatized survivors who trickled away from Harrenhal, was enough to keep them awake at night. Mummers' troops and tavern bards took this new fear and wove it into songs, some comedic, many terrifying. A few invented ballads about the new black dread, while others sang cautionary verses about how pride always met a fiery end, evoking Harren, the Black's historical doom. The small folk, as is their wont, tried to find some grim humor in the situation. Better to worry about the next meal than a dragon overhead, some said. But beneath the gallows humor lurked genuine dread. They had so little protection from petty lords and their raiders. How could they possibly hide from a dragon's wrath? Through all this, the War of the Five Kings churned on, albeit with greed. Our hesitation among the armies. Joffrey's hold on the throne remained, though overshadowed by rumors that he might soon be overshadowed literally by black wings above. Stannis and Renley continued their sibling rivalry, each convinced of his rightful claim, each eyeing the storms that might bring a monstrous shadow from the skies. Robb Stark advanced in the Riverlands with renewed vigor, hoping to exploit Lannister weakness without stepping into the path of unimaginable fire. Balon Greyjoy set his sights on further conquests, confident that the Ironborn's scattered fleets would never be an enticing target. Yet none could ignore that the realm trembled at the return of a draconic power not seen since the Targaryens' golden age. Every rumor swirling from that burned fortress in the heart of the Riverlands reinforced one chilling point. Tywin Lannister had likened the beast's size to that of Balerion, and then conceded it might be bigger still. If that comparison was true, if Aegon's legendary mount had, in fact, been surpassed, then Westeros stood at the threshold of a new epoch, one in which the old certainties of men and steel might crumble under an onslaught of scorching flame. But speculation upon the dragon's next move was just that, speculation. The news of its departure from Harrenhal, winging away from the carnage, left countless questions. Nobody knew its whereabouts, or whether it would strike again soon, or bide its time. From the vantage of every king, that uncertainty was as potent a weapon as the fire itself. A threat poised to descend was often more unsettling than one already unleashed. In one keep after another, talk circled back to the same whispers, the same comparisons, the same uneasy revelations. The War of the Five Kings, it seemed, might soon revolve around a single force that was not a mere king at all, but a dragon lord reborn. Whether such a force would unite the realm in fear or smash it entirely was unknown. For now, the kings advanced their claims as best they could, each mindful that on some distant horizon, black wings might appear, trailing smoke and cinders. And with them would come a new age of fire. In the corridors of Harrenhal, those that still stood, Tywin Lannister oversaw the final tasks of burying the dead and salvaging what could be saved. His lips stayed set in a thin, bloodless line as he watched men carry twisted timbers and lumps of melted iron from the courtyard. Smoke still lingered in the air like a bitter memory. Each step on the cracked stones recalled how easily they had been scorched. He said nothing, revealing nothing, but a fury deeper than any he had shown in years burned behind his eyes. The world had changed, and Tywin Lannister, who had always believed in the power of gold, armies, and cunning, now recognized that none of those tools could truly prevail against a foe with unstoppable dragonfire, unless he found an answer. So ravens flew, conversations turned heated in council chambers, and a hush of uncertainty blanketed the realm. The great game was more perilous than ever, for a new piece had been set upon the board, and if a single piece could sweep entire armies aside in an inferno, then truly no king's crown rested easy. Thus the rumor spread to every corner of the land. The dragon that dwarfed Balerion was real, and House Lannister had learned that truth the hard way. Whether the other claimants to the throne would fare any better was a question that kept nights awake, maesters scouring their books, and the common folk muttering prayers to their respective gods. The War of the Five Kings had a new dimension now, though none could say for sure if it would soon become a War of Six. All that was certain was that, from King Joffrey in his capital to Balon Greyjoy upon his wave-battered isles, every lord and every king now bore in mind that a shadow had emerged with black wings, and that no living memory had beheld such a frightening rebirth of draconic might. And though speculation might be whispered by firesides or bellowed in royal courts, though some might speak of forging alliances and others of forging weapons, one constant remained: the dread knowledge that Tywin Lannister himself, no stranger to war, had all but admitted defeat at Harrenhal's ruins, and, in the hush that followed, confessed that the beast he had seen was bigger than the greatest dragon the Targaryens had ever known. The Five Kings pondered the meaning of that claim in their separate domains, each cloaked in uneasy dreams of smoke and flame.